Hey listeners, ready to rethink the future of work? In today's episode of Stop Doing Stupid Stuff, Tim and Andreas dive into the remote versus office showdown. Is Amazon's return to office mandate driving top talent away? Why are quiet quitters silently sinking productivity? And what happens when companies focus on attendance over outcomes? From data-driven strategies to unexpected morale-boosting tips, this 20-minute episode is packed with insights that could reshape your work structure. Want to know why your best employees might be saying, "See ya"? Tune in and find out.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another exhilarating, exciting, breathtaking edition of the Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast with my co-conspirator and cellmate Tim Keefe. What are we talking about today?
Oh God, it's a wonderful way to start a podcast. But anyway, yes. Well, the last couple of weeks, and actually now it's like the last couple of years, you and I have really leaned in on employee experience, employee well-being, and I think, of course, during the pandemic, a lot of rules or what people thought were rules about work kind of got blown up. One of the big ones being that people working from home weren't as effective as people working in the office. In fact, I think a lot of data, depending on how you want to look at the data, either shows one way or the other around that. But there's no question about it that people now believe that there should be options in their work schedule. So with that, I mean, I just wanted to kind of jump in. I mean, our friends at Amazon are continuing to push hard for, return to office 5 day a week. We're already hearing about, people saying revenge job hunting, all these different terms as a reaction to what's going on. And I think this becomes really fascinating because, there are people saying, well, if uh, if Amazon goes to this, then everybody can expect, well, I'll be back to 5 day a week in office work environments. I mean, what do you think about that?
I, I think we're gonna see. There's a whole bunch of factors I think impacting the decision making for this, but I'll kind of say it like this. If you guys remember, there was the quiet quitting kind of phenomenon, right? When everybody was virtualized, you had a much better selection because you could take your skill set and experience and work from home and work for a different company. And so there was a lot of job hopping that was going on, but it wasn't like, oh, I just saw this great position, I'm going to apply for it, and the next week I'm going to be there. It was really me being at a place where I wasn't happy for some reason, but I wasn't voicing that up, which is a problem into itself because that means your employees don't feel valued or trusted enough to share their opinion. That's a problem. Second, that's impacting their productivity because if they're job hunting, then guess what? Their productivity is going to be impacted as well. I mean, shocker, right? And so a lot of CEOs or executives would say, "Oh, well, productivity went down when it was work from home." Well, yeah, because one, you took everything you were doing in the office and then tried to do it over Zoom in a work at home environment, which is asinine into itself. It's completely illogical. And then people are like, well, hey, I don't like this place anymore. I'm gonna start looking for another job, so I'm not gonna try as hard at my current job. And then the CEOs and CFOs or whoever the evaluators are like, oh my gosh, productivity is coming down since we went to work from home, and um, we got to go back to the office now. And so it's kind of like an absolutionist point of view. Either it's one way or the other. And I think, and I'm going to go on record, I think I've said this before, but in case I haven't, go on record and say, I do think there are certain jobs that need to be done in an office. 100% they need to be. I would say the percentage of those jobs is very, very small. And it's not the traditional thinking of every job needs to be in the office. I think a majority of modern jobs actually can very efficiently and productively be done in work and home environments if you have the right conducive environment set up and the right support system, the right like mid-management structure, et cetera. And that's not as easy as it sounds, but I guarantee if you do it the right way, you can measurably see the positive results from it objectively. And so I think a lot of the decision making right now, again, is being made for maybe I would say kind of old school thinking or logic about, well, we have a lease on our, X amount of square footage physical office, and so we need to get people in there to make the best use of it. And hey, before the pandemic, we were doing pretty good. So, and that was in office, and so that's like my comfort blanket. That's my comfort zone. So let's revert back to that. And it may work for some companies. I think again, there's a lot of circumstances that may mask whether or not the view of just going back to the office actually works or not if you're not looking at the right things and taking the right like measurements or observations. Um, so I think it's going to be interesting because I think the people now have an environment where they have more options and more choices, and they'll respond in kind. And if companies revert back to the office after they, by the way, they told a lot of their tenured workers, "Hey, we're not going back to the office. So, if you want to move to Antarctica and you have an internet connection, go for it."
Yeah.
2 years later, nah, we're gonna need you to, leave Antarctica and come back to Seattle, Washington.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
Well,
gonna be interesting to see how people respond. But that's kind of my short
yeah.
version, believe it or not, of some of my thoughts.
Well, no, I mean, where I was at a dinner event the other day, and we were talking about, this return to office mandate and what are you trying to accomplish with it? And of course, one belief is that this is a great way to drive attrition without a formal layoff, right? So we expect that some significant portion of these people will go, yeah, I don't want to come back to the office for all the things you mentioned, right? I relocated. I'm in a situation where I really like what works for me, and this is what I want to keep doing. The challenge is, I think, when you're an organization and you do that, is you're telling your best people, the people who have the most options, and whatever those skills are that make them attractive, they're the ones who are going to go because they have options. The ones that are, I think, you're going to be kind of left with, I hate to say this, but are the quiet quitting ones, the ones that were, hey, what's the bare minimum to get by? And
Hmm.
even they're looking for a new job. So what you're really going to end up with, and again, this gets back to what are we measuring? Are we
Right.
measuring attendance? Are we measuring outcomes? And if I'm taking my workforce, which may already only be at the average, global average was 30% engaged, which means
Yeah.
70% of your labor costs are
Feels like they're not.
probably not being used effectively to deliver whatever your products and services are. That's
Yeah.
a huge leak in any organization. And yet we don't seem to be addressing that. We're addressing attendance, or we're addressing their location, and again, I'm still not understanding what's happening in those mandated get together times that's going to result in a better outcome. Is there team building going on? Is there improved education going on? Is there soft skills development, hard skills development? And, oh, and by the way, we're going to have less middle managers,
Hmm.
so our span of controls are going to grow up. Our employees who are already complaining about lack of engagement with their supervisors are going to have even less time to engage with their supervisors. So are we, trying to look for, new numbers for lack of engagement? I mean, you could still have 10,000 employees, but if they're only performing at 10% capacity, hiring more
Well,
employees that are still at 10% doesn't seem to solve the problem.
no, exactly. I mean, I just look at it as a mathematical equation of saying, okay, well, one, you have those numbers from the Gallup survey, right, of engagement that most 7 out of 10, let's just say, don't feel like they're engaged. And
Mhm.
so these are the people that actually do the work that generate the revenue, not the managers who make the decision, set up the structure, and they're the ones who actually do the work and make the revenue, right? And so if they're feeling disengaged, that right there to me is just a red flag. Now, if you go back and look at your objectively measured outcomes, like let's just say simple P&L, okay? If your P&L is on the up and your sales, compound annual growth rate is up, and you have all those objectively measurable good signs, then okay, you can say, you know what, they feel like they're not engaged, but here are the other objectively measured metrics like our turnover, our attrition, our revenue, etc. If those are green, like I always use everything in red, yellow, green, then okay, more power to you to run your company. And I do believe in the autonomy of companies making decisions and doing what they want for good or bad, as long as it's not crossing ethical lines, unethical lines, I should say. And so it's just that math equation of going back and looking at those actual important, objectively measured. I can't stress the objective side enough of what the outcomes are. And so what I think is occurring is we had a bunch of overhiring during the pandemic. Spending is no one is it's a very pessimistic outlook. I haven't talked to anybody in literally any industry that I can think of that is excited about the fiscal Q4 this year to end the year out and going into 2025 for a variety of reasons. And so if you overhire, then yes, you got to bring your costs down. Now, if your financial outlook, your revenue outlook doesn't look rosy, then yeah, you got to bring your costs in. Otherwise, if you're a publicly traded company, investors are going to be like, what the hell are these guys doing? We're going to sell, and the shares reductions start taking place and dropping the price. And so if you're looking at all of that, you're cutting your costs, you're doing exactly what you're talking about by saying, "Oh, Tim, I know you spent $20,000 to move to Antarctica. I need you to come back to Seattle." But yeah, and I can't give you a spot bonus to fund your move back, but we need you here Monday. You're going to be like, big middle finger to you, and you're out. And so the thing is, your productivity, your tenure, your experience, and your salary are all going to leave that company. And so, how are they going to replace that productivity, the objectively measured contributions you've made? How are they going to replace that along with the cost? What I think is going to end up happening is the overhiring that they should have been like hygienically maintaining throughout the entire time anyways, which a lot of companies did, and they overhired greatly. Now they're trying to not create bad press by doing layoffs and um just bad, I want to say like karma, like bad market perception internally and externally in the organization. So they're kind of going through and like laying people off, but not making announcements about it when they don't have to. If they can, in the U.S., if they can avoid, and they don't meet the requirements of the WARN Act, then they're not going to report anything, right? There's no self-reporting going on, but the employees see it, and so think about the productivity and the feelings that they have. If they're already feeling like they're not engaged, and now they're seeing, oh, 50 people in this department are gone. What is that going to do to their productivity? You
Oh,
know?
just plummet. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a we used to have this thing. I ran a lot of contact centers, as have you, and I remember doing this with a client in probably 2004, and they were just like throwing bodies at the calls, right? Like that was their solution. And yet the the morale within the contact center was very, very low. And I did a couple of focus groups and was trying to unravel like why is there so much like anger actually in the contact center. And what we found was that the manager of the contact center was playing favorites. He was not of, hey, we have standards, but they don't apply to everybody. They only apply to people I don't like. And so, people already started to see, hey, wait a minute, this isn't about what I do or how I do it. It's about who I know or what kind of personal relationship I have with the boss. And again, you can imagine just how productivity in that organization was extremely low. And our
Yeah.
recommendation was that they needed to change out management in that team, and that the senior executives needed to start doing brown bag lunches with that group. And that was very controversial because the executive, the CEO at the time, was very much like a human interaction wasn't his thing. Super, super
Hands
smart
off.
guy,
Yeah.
but not good socialization. So the idea of sitting in a lunchroom with 10 or 15 of his employees and just being open to a conversation was terrifying for him. But he did it. And it was very well received. People are like, holy cow,
Yeah.
the boss is actually coming down and willing to listen. And sometimes that's all it takes. So,
Well, I
um,
mean, it's a huge gesture in the right direction, especially if you're a human dependent business, like most businesses are. And
yep.
so if you think about exactly what you just said, a lot of companies right now are not only reducing frontline employees, right, because they overhired, but also managers, middle management. And so if you already take a population that's telling you 70% of them feel like they're not engaged, and you're cutting out the middle management, and now you're leaving it to the, quote unquote executives that, kind of feel a certain way about oh, well, that's low level people. I was doing, I did that job 20 years ago. I did that, I'm above that now. No, you're the one that has to engage with these people now and get more productivity than you're getting right now. Oh, and by the way, you can't hire across
Right.
the entire world or the United States, for
Yeah.
example. You got to hire
Yep.
within this radius of this brick and mortar office and so I think I don't want to be a pessimist and say I think from a probability standpoint, there's low probability that this is actually going to work out. And I think you're going to see pivots from companies making decisions about return to the
Yeah.
office and narrowing it down to, yeah, this role, this job we do need in the office. And I do like I'm an advocate for that. But I think you're going to see less 30,000 foot view decision making and more granular decision making from this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to see some companies not make it or be very, very impacted that are going to have to shift, and you'll see C-level shuffling going on. And
Well, we're already seeing that, right? Like in some
yeah,
of the companies you and I follow, we're seeing the people who can't make the pivot get punted to the roadside.
yeah,
I I don't, again, I would say it's like everything else, right? It depends on the individual, depends on the circumstances, depends on the job, yada yada yada. But I do think a digital worker, or you could take your term, I call it kind of digital worker havens, that concept that I can create work, do work, be a doer, be a thought leader, have a side hustle. That's a different world. And now it's becoming very, very accepted. Where even 5 years ago, that was like, oh, now it's like, oh, you don't have a side hustle? Like it's
yeah,
almost like who doesn't have one? And of course, that leads back to the whole question of, where are people's quote loyalties? But if you're only, if you're quiet quitting and you're just doing it for the paycheck or for the healthcare, and then you're really doing something else on the side because that's where your energy is, that's that's not a good sign. Something's broken, right? And either from a structural perspective, from a society perspective,
yeah.
it's like something's wrong. Um,
Agreed. Agreed.
but
And companies got to get their stuff together because, every week you can just go out and look at some of the LinkedIn articles or,
yeah,
just search news sites and see people committing suicide, taking their lives because of sales
the
pressure
pressure.
or quota
Yeah,
pressure.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's such an unfortunate thing. And I think once again, I think it's not something that you can actually give advice on because even some of the I'm not going to name names, but companies you would consult for, from an advice standpoint are giving out advice that doesn't make a lot of sense
Well,
to me.
yeah, they speak to the audience, right? If the
Yeah.
audience is sitting there with with a lot of real estate, they're going to say, go back to the office. If the
Yeah.
client's sitting there with a lot of rentals they can get out of, they might be saying, you could drop that 7 or 8% cost item right to your bottom line. And what would you want to do with that money? And I think that's where you're getting a lot of companies also going, there's a new way of doing things, to your point. And I think the biggest one is talent.
Yeah.
If in a virtual environment I can pursue the best talent in the world, regardless of location, that seems pretty attractive to me. Given
Yeah.
versus being limited to a particular geo, right? Or
Right.
even city in a geo.
And I
So
think when people, and I'll wrap, otherwise, you and I are really passionate about this. We'll keep going on and on. I think people are resilient and people will find a way forward with it when they're in these circumstances that maybe they haven't faced before and they have different levels of anxiety or logical thinking and just problem solving, creative problem solving. I think some solutions are going to emerge just giving all of the environmental circumstances right now. And we'll see pathways forward. I don't think it's
yeah.
going to be easy and I don't think it's going to be immediate, but I think we'll be able to look back at this period, hopefully, we'll look back at this period and say, man, we were kind of stupid for doing stuff like this. Wow, right? Someone should write a series of books about that.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think we're going to continue to talk about this and hopefully be more data driven in the conversations we're having
Yeah,
in this area. But I do think this whole employee engagement space is a huge gap in many organizations. I think we could be on the cusp of this is like the next CRM in terms of focusing on the employee as a corollary to the customer. Not one or the other, but together type of thing.
Agreed.
All right. Well, with that, Mr. Andreas, sir, hopefully we have another, good week in front of us. Thanks again for joining today. Really appreciate it. Let's just keep banging away on this conversation.
Yep, agreed. Thanks for everybody listening, and make sure if you enjoy, subscribe, smash that like button. Isn't that what people say, smash the like button or whatever? And let us know about some topics you'd like us to talk about or that you think are just stupid. We love talking about stupid topics and dissecting them. So let us know what you think.
Sounds good. Yeah. Appreciate it, everybody. Thank you. Take care.